Hey everybody. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the audit and accountability section, basically the family of controls, that's the word I'm looking for, of NIST 800-171. So audit and accountability, we've got a few controls here. I've included the specific control numbers if you're interested in looking into these a little more. Let's talk a little bit about each control and how this can impact LabVIEW and kind of test and measurement. So our first control is create and retain system audit logs and records to the extent needed to enable the monitoring, analysis, investigation, and reporting of unlawful or unauthorized system activity. So what this means is your system, your LabVIEW system, or whatever language you could be programming in, needs to keep track of what is going on in that system. So it could be tracking, and it doesn't really define what that stuff is, right? And that's kind of part of the thing with NIST 800-171 is a lot of that stuff is very vague, and a lot of it is up to you to decide, what will cover security requirements. And you'll have to convince an assessor, right? If an assessor comes to see what you've done, you're gonna have to convince them that what you've done is sufficient. So it doesn't specify what you need to record, but it does specify, hey, you need to be creating some sort of record of what's going on in the system. So in case we ever need to go look into something, like, hey, maybe something happened, so there was some data that was leaked, or data was changed illegally, stuff like that, we can go look into see what happened. So like I said, there's not actually a set way to do this, and it's up to you to decide how you're going to log that data. So a couple good options in my opinion. Syslog is a great way to manage that. So if you set up like a syslog collector somewhere in your facility, and you can send syslog messages to it, and it will collect those data. And there's enterprise tools that do this. So if you want to just buy a solution, you can, and it comes with, the code that will, to be able to receive those messages across the network, but it also will usually give you tools for, viewing the data, for filtering the data, for generating reports, stuff like that. There's also a couple different syslog APIs in LabVIEW. I have one that's open source. You can go to my GitLab and you can pull it and you can use it. It supports UDP and TLS, so you can use either. And it has both a collector and a device implementation. So syslog is a really good way to handle that, but it doesn't actually have to be across the network. We just need to keep track of what's going on. So you can even log to local files. Like, NIST 800-171 isn't telling you how this has to be done. So as long as you're keeping track of what's going on, and that could be stuff like, oh, this user signed in to this software. Oh, this user started this test. Oh, this user input, some data. And it's up to you to define, and every system's different as well, right? The amount of user interaction, the more users are interacting with the system, probably the more information you need to be recording. If there's something that's pretty much fully automated, right? A user just walks up and presses like a go button, there's really not a ton you need to record. I would record, hey, this new test started, this new test stopped, and some details about what that test was, right? Whether that's, part numbers, serial numbers, some way to basically have some traceability there. But basically, we just need to have data. So if we ever need to go investigate, we can look and see what was happening in the past on that system. Next control is ensure that the actions of individual system users can be uniquely traced to those users so they can be held accountable for their actions. So the actions of these users need to be linked to the user, right? So we need to go, not just say, hey, this test started, but say, hey, this user started this test. Hey, this user input this data. So if they were, falsifying information, if they, whatever it is, right, we can trace it back to that user. So we do need to be keeping track of that information. In LabVIEW, it's really easy to pull the current Windows user information, right? So if I just want to say who's logged in right now, I can pull that information. So that will require, though, that you're not using shared logins on computers, which you shouldn't be doing that anyways per NIST 800-171. But yeah, if you have unique user logins, you can just pull who's logged into the computer right now and say, hey, this user did that. You can also create other login systems. So in LabVIEW, you can have a pop-up with custom usernames and passwords. You could have people scan like a badge or something using like an RFID reader, and that it would be unique to users. So there's different ways that you can determine who this user is, but you need to have some way to know, hey, who is running this system right now, and then keep track of that. 3.3.3 is review and update logged events. So we just need to take a look at that information. We don't want to just store it and never touch it. So we do want to set some sort of plan to review these events and see if the information we're collecting cover what we need it to, and also just check for abnormalities. 3.3.4 is alert in the event of an audit logging process failure. So depending on how you're logging this information, you want to have some way to say, oh, I wasn't able to record that. So, if it could be something as simple as popping up an error and being like, I was unable to log this. It could be something like notifying kind of whoever's in charge of that system, right? If you have a test system, you've got some sort of, engineers, manufacturing engineering team, something like that, who's over that system. You want to notify those people. So it could be something like an email. You can send out notifications other ways as well. It could even be a big red light that turns on, right? So, it's really up to you to define that, how you're going to accommodate that. But you do need to make sure that if logging is ever failing for some reason, that there is a way to notify the appropriate people in that case. 3.3.5, correlate audit record review, analysis, and reporting processes for investigation and responses to indications of unlawful, unauthorized, suspicious, or unusual activity. This kind of, in my opinion, ties back a little bit to 3.3.3. We need to be looking at these logs. We need to be evaluating the information in them, not just recording it and never touching it unless something crazy happens, then go back and try to look in the logs and see how that happened. But we should actively be reviewing these and determining is everything that's going on correct, right? Like, is there anything weird going on? And not to throw anything necessarily at the operators specifically, right? Sometimes weird stuff can happen that can seem suspicious, and it actually was very non-intentional, or it could even be the fault of the test system, right? The test system could be doing something weird, So we need to be looking at this data, and we need to be trying to correlate and do some analysis on this data to try to make sure just, everything's, working as it should, and that nothing suspicious is kind of going on. So 3.3.6 is provide audit record reduction and report generation to support on-demand analysis and reporting. So if you buy enterprise level, like syslog tools or whatever, you're pretty much going to get this out of the box. Now, if you're not, though, you're going to need to create some way that you can basically generate a report of this data. So, hey, I can just go click a button and hey, it's going to generate all this information that shows maybe, different information about the system, as it's sequenced through different, steps, or errors that it's thrown, or, warnings, or whatever that might be. We want to see that information. So you need to have a way that I can just, go and look at this data. I don't need to go talk to IT to get access to some certain file to, we just need a way that you can just generate a report on demand. And like I said, if you're buying enterprise tools, this is pretty much provided out of the box, so you don't have to worry about it. 3.3.7, provide a system capability that compares and synchronizes internal system clocks with an authoritative source to generate timestamps for audit records. So because you're going to be logging this information, you also need to be logging timestamps of when these events are occurring. And you want to make sure those timestamps are accurate. You don't want to, if the time was way off, or even if the date was way off, right? It could totally throw you off. If you're trying to go sift through these logs and try to find something, and the time is all off, it can totally screw up your analysis. So because of that, we need to be synchronizing to an authoritative source. So there are a couple different ways you can do this. Probably the most robust, right, is for your internal IT team to set up time servers locally that sync to the NIST time servers, and then just all of your internal computers and systems can just sync up to those internal time servers. That's the best way to manage that. If you cannot do that, you also can have each system independently synchronized to NIST. So you can have your computer sync up to different NIST time servers, or even like a compact Rio. It actually has tools as well, so you can synchronize it to like an NIST server, provided that compact Rio has internet access so that it can actually reach those. But yeah, you do want to make sure those timestamps are accurate. So, and if you're interested in this, I actually have a previous YouTube video where I talk about how you can do this on Windows. So if you're interested, that would be how. But like I said, the best way you can do that is to set up time servers internally that are synchronized to NIST, if you can. That way you don't have all of these external connections that are all connecting to NIST. You can just have basically one server that's connected to NIST, and everything else can connect to that server. Okay, 3.3.8, protect audit information and audit logging tools from unauthorized access, modification, and deletion. So we do need to control, and depending on where these logs are, how you do this could be different. But we need to control so no one can go in and just delete logs or modify logs, right? Change, the information that's stored in there, or even view them if they shouldn't have access to those. So depending on, like I said, how you're doing this, there's different ways. If you're using a syslog server, I think it becomes a lot easier because typically you're going to have a server somewhere, and someone's going to need to be able to either access the server directly, or if you're using enterprise tools, right, there'll be usually a web interface that you can just sign into. You can use Windows authentication through Active Directory, or you can create specific accounts to that. So that way you have to sign in to be able to interact with the logs at all. If you're logging data locally, there's some different things you can do, right? So if we have a log file, and it could be SQLite, or it could even just be a text file. We want to make sure that people can't get in, view this stuff, modify it, or delete it. So we need to protect the files against deletion. So a good thing to do is just set the files to be protected. So only an administrator on the system can actually do something with it. And that's a good way to keep a lot of people out. So only administrators, people with certain privileges, can actually do something. And another thing too, if you want to kind of preventing unauthorized access. So even if someone maybe had read access to the files, we can kind of obfuscate that even more by encrypting these files. So there's different ways you can do that. You can either handle that in LabVIEW, you can use different tools to encrypt files externally. If you're using SQLite as well, you can also encrypt your SQLite files as well. So that's another good option. But yeah, so depending on how you're doing that, you just need to make sure that you're controlling who can actually access these and making sure people can't just go in and modify stuff and delete things. And then the last thing, limit management of audit logging functionality to a subset of privileged users. So, in your company, you could have, hundreds of developers, right? Not every developer needs access to the management side of all that audit logging. So if you have a syslog server, you're not going to give that to anyone and everyone. And people in production who might want to look at stuff, and you need to control who actually has that management capabilities. And typically that's going to be your IT teams, right? It's up to your discretion on who you're going to add to that subset of privileged users. But yeah, basically you just want to make sure this isn't just some web page that anyone in the company can go to and they can view all of this information. So, but yeah, that would basically be the Audit and Accountability section of NIST 800-171. Biggest things for LabVIEW is let's figure out a logging solution. Like I said, syslog is a great way to manage that. But it doesn't have to be that solution. You can log data to a local file. you can push that data to a database and you can create some sort of custom solution, or you can just buy an out-of-the-box solution. Either one. The other big thing is you need to make sure clocks are synchronized. So if your IT team hasn't already set up a way for computers to do that automatically, you can do that through LabVIEW. And like I said, I have a previous video that shows you how you can do that in LabVIEW. That would be Audit and Accountability in NIST 800-171. Thanks for tuning in.
Canon Controls is your gateway to mastering LabVIEW. Dive into programming for data acquisition, industrial communications, and manufacturing automation. Explore how to enhance your projects with cybersecurity best practices. Join the journey to elevate your skills and secure your systems with every episode.